So welcome, Matthew.
Yes. So first, almost 20% of people in the UK aged 16 and over showed symptoms of anxiety or depression. And that's just the people who you can notice signs or will dare to talk about it. I believe it's even more. Recently, one of my childhood heroes died. He killed himself. And so it proves that depression and suicide and mental disease is not just for the poor, it's for everyone, and financial or popular success will not get you out of it. So first, let's have a quick roundup of what I will call Mental Health 1.0. And first, let's see the type of metrics that they have. So you see the way that they measure success in our current medical establishment is reduction of suicide attempts. And indeed, antidepressants make sure that people are sedated, so then they don't want to do anything. Also, symptoms reduction. That's how they measure success, because what they actually treat are the symptoms. They do not treat the causes, and they do not work on prevention. So the way that I think of it, 1.0, we will just treat the symptoms, so we don't have to think that it's there. Then 2.0, we will treat the cause, what actually provoke those symptoms. And 3.0, perhaps we should prevent those in the first place. So for me, the metrics that the medical establishment use for success is just a failure. Now, drug policy. In 2010, Professor David Nutt was actually mandated by the UK government, the Ministry of Medicine, to do research on the harm of drugs. And this is the result. Number one, alcohol. Unbelievable. And other studies have been made. Meta-analysis, the data is very, very solid. You can see on the right, heroin, crystal meth, crack cocaine, okay, that's fine. But look at this. Those legal, all those are legal. So there is a complete disconnect between the legality and the effects that those drugs have. Also, what this chart doesn't include, because perhaps it's only include the harm, but it doesn't include the benefits. Because you see many of the drugs that are on the bottom left quadrant have actually more benefits than harm. If you could say that at the right end is sort of poison, on the left end it's more like magic potion, basically. Pretty much they have very little side effects for some of them. But you can see this, it's completely random the way that we've chosen drugs. So for instance, I think it's fine that we keep cocaine illegal, because you see the Incas use cocaine very frequently, and they kill themselves, like they self-sacrifice so much, it makes people psychopathic. And all the bankers, all the politicians, they're all on it. Heroin, crystal meth, crack cocaine, do never try anything like this. It's gonna fuck your life forever, because it will bypass all your critical sense, and you will forever crave it. And so I do not recommend this. Nicotine as well is very addictive, and it's what we call amphetamine. So it sort of stimulates and it gives you pleasure, and so you're back for more. Yes, okay. But yeah, alcohol, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? It's one of the most common, let's say, social glue that we have. And yet, the data is very strong. It's so bad for us. Like we use it to clean the floor, to clean bacteria, really. But it destroys us. It destroys families. It puts people on the street. And that's just the truth. So drug policy is a total failure. Now, psychotherapy. Well, psychotherapy, to be honest, it kind of works. But it's sort of inefficient. It takes years to train a psychotherapist. Then to go through the process is quite painful. There is it takes a long time of only one person giving a treatment at a time. So it does help, but it's not great. Psychiatry. Well, on the scale of treating symptoms and cause, psychiatry is right at the top. It just, doesn't help in in treating the cause. So people are addicted to antidepressant and Prozac because it just numbs the pain. That's what it does. And then people become zombies, they lose their critical abilities, and that's it. ADHD, how we treat ADHD? We give kids Ritalin. Do you know what Ritalin is? Methamphetamine. It's the same class as crystal meth. You know, like Breaking Bad? It's the same class of drug. Of course, it's less harmful because it's not exactly the same molecule, but it basically makes people schizophrenic. And all opiates, so we use it to treat pain. What's the difference between morphine and heroin? Does anyone know?
2 acetyl groups.
Sorry?
2 acetyl groups.
Yeah, but it's basically the same thing. It's pretty much the same. So you see the molecules, they are the same family. And so either we consider it as like a medical treatment or like a drug, it's basically arbitrary. And it's also the stigma that we give to things that makes things worse. So let me introduce to you the circuit of reward. It's basically how we are driven to do the things that we do. And the way it works is like every time you get some kind of pleasure, you're gonna record this in memory and you will try to redo the same path to get that pleasure again. And so naturally we will get this pleasure from having sex or from food or from social activities. But when you use some of those drugs that trigger the pleasure center, so the opiates, you know, the crack cocaine, nicotine, methamphetamine, all of that, you're addicted straight away. So those are drugs you should never touch. So psychiatry, for me, is a failure. Now, those are the killers of our mental health. This is what is really fucking us up. Sugar. So what is this? This is cocaine. It's just a molecule, you can see. What is this? Sugar. It's just a molecule, as you can see. So the classification of what is a drug, what is a medicine, what is food, and so on, is completely made up. Everything is chemistry. Now, there was this misconception that fat makes people fat. That's not true. Sugar makes people fat. This is a chart in the US that shows the correlation between carb usage and obesity. And just because they started to reduce carb, then it starts to drop. But it's not fat who makes people fat. It's actually the processing of sugar that creates some reserve and cause all sorts of inflammation in the body. I'll tell more about it after. But also, there is correlation between being more fat and more depressed. It's a two-way thing, which is the fatter you are, the more depressed you become, but also you eat a lot as a coping mechanism for your emotional pain. This is an article I found in The Guardian talking about the rise of sugar. The empire, it might be said, was built on a huge sugar, caffeine, and nicotine rush. Sugar, more than anything, seems to have made life worth living. Sugar was an ideal substance. It served to make a busy life seem less so. It eased or seemed to ease the changes back and forth from work to rest. It provided swifter sensation of fullness and satisfaction and complex carbohydrate things. Basically, they kept us sedated on sugar just so we will get on with our lot. And now here is a quick treatment for it. Eat a lemon. So when you eat a lemon is bitter, right? We call it the bitter truth. It's gonna cure your sugar addiction. It's gonna reset your taste buds. In fact, they knew this in all the occult tradition. The Freemasons, the Hermetic tradition, so the one who believe in the teachings of Hermes, or thought for the Egyptians. They believe that the fruit of knowledge is the lemon, because the illusion is sweet, so there's like a connection, and the truth is bitter. And when you eat the lemon, it's gonna really reset your internal, system, and your mind is gonna open up as well. You will see. Another killer is our meaningless lives. So have you ever stopped and wondered why you do what you do? Most people just don't. They're just whatever, like, why are we doing the thing that we do in our society? Where are we going to? Is there a bigger meaning to our lives, to our story? Most people don't want to think about that. So they just listen to, you know, like what their parents told them, what the government, what the school, and this is what you need to do, and all of that. And it's not very much the case that it's always in line with our deep inner desires. Not so much. But so to get on with our lot, we keep ourselves distracted all the time. So entertainment, video games, holidays, sport, alcohol, we retreat, purchase, success, whatever. Where if you really want to face, you know, your life and get better, you need to look within. And psychedelics help us do that. But only when you find meaning in your life. You don't care about happiness so much. You know what your life is for. And now it's like this, instead of having preacher telling you what you need to do with your life, you need to be empowered. That's really the way to be as human beings, you know? And for some people as well, it might also be starting a family. Because now with so much cultural background of like female empowerment, well, female should have a career and so on. Turns out when they reach the age of 50, if they didn't have children and so on, they get depressed. You see, we're just animals. I mean, we're programmed, we're designed for certain things. We cannot chase away our nature. So another killer is social isolation. This is how we live. We live in boxes. Sometimes in boxes of 2, sometimes in boxes of 4. Many often in London, boxes of 1. But really, we are designed to live in communities of 150 individuals. All anthropologists will tell you that. And it's like thousands of years of genetic legacy in us. And yet there's such a mismatch between our reality and the illusion. And the new generation is obsessed with this show, Friends. Maybe because they don't realize what real friends are, because for them they see friends on Facebook and Twitter, so they just associate that's what a friend actually is. It turns out they have no ideas, and the young generation is the epidemic of mental health that they're gonna have unless we do something is gonna be incredible. And I call it the delusion gap. It's the disconnection between the truth and reality, and people just live in a bubble, in an illusion that's being fabricated by all those social media to keep them addicted. And so they don't know what's going on. Actually, they're not aware of this. And that's the big problem. But look at this. Don't you want to trade your friends for those guys? I mean, they look so happy, right? So that's the thing. But this is unrealistic expectations. Sexual frustration. Do you know, this is how big the porn is, you know, in terms of, percentage of the internet. It's like 1/3 of it. And many people are addicted to porn. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about those things. But turns out we share 99.8% gene in common with the bonobos, which, if you know their practice, they have sex every time, just to let go of all their tension and so on. And they're one of the most peaceful primate society around. Like chimpanzees and gorillas just don't match them in terms of harmony. There's this book that came up, Sex at Dawn, that argued that actually the female sexuality is not what we thought at all. Even our ancient sexuality was not what we thought. So the idea was like a woman will come out of a cave and pick like 5 pretendants, and then we'll have sex with the 5 of them. And then the idea is to promote competition in utero. So like you have multiple sperms that are designed to fight other mate sperms. So it's almost like our sperm is designed, I mean, it's representative of the species that are highly promiscuous. And it turns out we have many sperms that are solely dedicated to fight each other. It's like it's supposed to be a battlefield in utero, believe it or not. But once again, this is not very comfortable truth. So interesting story is the origin of the word neurotic. I don't know if you know, but it means not erotic. It comes from Freud, and who noticed this pattern that women who were not sexually satisfied were depressed or moody. In fact, in the Victorian era, where they had just one diagnostic for female, it was hysteria. So how they treated them, they stimulated them to orgasm. And you know what? It was an effective, very effective treatment until it was not deemed very appropriate. And yeah, hysteria was quite often in virgin, nuns, widow, and so on. But it's the same for men. That's why you have so many priests in the, Catholics and so on, who are sexually frustrated, who become insane, because we are not designed for this. So there are many other, damages to our mental health. I don't have time to go through them, but I thought those were significant. So what will mental health 2.0 look like? How could we treat the cause? Well, perhaps orgasm, If we taught people how to enjoy their sexuality better, in particular women, because most women believe they cannot have vaginal orgasm, which is total fallacy. It's just that they have so much trauma in their body that they cannot fully let go. But talking about drugs, this is the wonder drug. There's nothing better for your health. Physical, mental, nothing. It helps you sleep better, it removes stress, reduce cancer, reduce risk of heart attack, improve your skin condition, improve your immune system, and reduce headache. It's the wonder drug. It's perfect. No side effects. Cannabis. Cannabis was a sacred plant for thousands of years. In fact, this is Setha, the goddess of wisdom of the Egyptian, Sesha, forgot. And they used it for their treatment of pain and inflammation and everything for thousands of years. So it reduced pain, reduced the risk of cancer, of acne, improve heart condition, and it's neuroprotective. In fact, now you can go to Holland and Barrett, it's completely legal. You can buy CBD, so no THC, no psychoactive ingredient. And it's wonderful. In fact, you can give it to children instead of ADHD treatment. It's so good to treat anxiety. Then there's the THC part of it, which is the more psychoactive, and you need to balance the two. The problem is that you have some strain of cannabis that are too much THC and not enough CBD, and people can become schizophrenic if they do that. So you always need to balance the two. See, nature is well made. But it can reduce stress, reduce anxiety. It's not addictive, although there might be some psychological addiction, but not physical. It increases openness to experience. It can help with PTSD. It reduces sort of the ego, it improves intuition and spirituality. Now, psychedelic, I won't go too far, but this is the graph that Dr. Carhart came up. And in 1 week, the reduction of depression is just incredible. Nowhere in the medical establishment, be like physical treatment or so on, you get to see numbers like that. It's unbelievable. It's just one take, as opposed to antidepressant that you need to take your entire life, basically. And so psychedelics actually, they created the word to mean, from the Greek, to say reveal the mind. And I think that's pretty much what it does. It improves your self-perception. So suddenly, instead of being only in your own body, you're sort of detached from it and you're able to see yourself from an outsider's perspective. But so it gives yourself a very harsh judgment of how you live your life. And like they say, after it's about you. You need to change the way that you do, because we always think that the problem are other people. But the psychedelics are gonna tell you, oh, you're the problem sometimes too, and you're gonna have to face the things that you don't want to face. In fact, so the Greeks used the psychedelics to improve their mental health and their ideation. And know thyself, actually, the motto of Socrates and the way of personal development actually was catalyzed by the Kykeon, which was a psychedelic drink based on the ergot, which is a parasite that grows on barley. The Christian also, like the Eucharist, there's so many evidence to show that they knew about the psychedelics like ages ago, and even in some church in the south of France, where they kept some of the Hermetic tradition, they built churches that celebrated mushrooms and psychedelics. But Buddha was probably on it as well, as like the Soma ritual of the Hindu. Actually, is a mix of a bunch of antipsychotic, hallucinogen, and a tool to improve breathing. So they created a brew for personal exploration, but mental health. Because it was not true that Buddha was just meditate and so on. No. MDMA, so what we used to call ecstasy, and that gave us the rave culture, that actually was one of the most instrumental way to improve social cohesion between people of different colors. Black and white and didn't matter in the rave culture. Before you had so many separate cultures, but the hippie movement and rave culture, that it was all fueled by MDMA, ecstasy. And think of drugs as they're like a medium. They help you think differently, and so it changes your behavior. Instead of watching TV, it provokes some reaction in you. Well, having this medium also provokes some reaction in you, but perhaps in the better. So there's been trials now, and it found that MDMA is an outstanding treatment for PTSD, and it's extremely safe. Basically, you take vitamin C to make up for and you drink well, and you'd have pretty much no side effect with MDMA. Trauma, how we heal trauma? So the problem is our Western societies, we think it's everything there. So we have psychology and or psychiatry where we try to medicate just the chemistry. But the problem is it's there. Trauma is in the body. So treatment, shake it off. So there's a bunch of new disciplines, ecstatic dance, biodynamic breath work, TRE, and so on, that helps release those trauma through the body. But basically, the process is actually extremely simple and natural, actually. In fact, we have it in all of us.
Much like a pressure release valve, this same tension-releasing mechanism exists in humans. But culturally, we have learned to suppress or override this response. Until now, it has not been well studied or well understood. Dr. David Berceli, while working in trauma and stress recovery in war-torn areas, recognized the healing potential of this reflex for relieving traumatic and...
Okay. But so the idea is like you have tremor, in your muscles that normally you suppress. So you see, if I go like this, I'm shaking and I'm not doing it. It just happened. And then the process is you just let it happen. And then it's gonna take your whole body. And you just let it happen. That's all you need to do. You do it every day. For a while, it's gonna release all your tension. But at some point, you might need to treat, the mental aspect as well. But it's some things that you can use in a group setting. It's sort of a dance where instead of people judging each other and looking at each other, everybody just fully express what they have, their pain, their joy, whatever it is. And one of the most important ingredients is to breathe. Because the problem is we hold our breath. And whatever you do, if you keep breathing, you're gonna take away this trauma out. That's how it works. And so yoga, meditation is all through the breathing. Now hypnotherapy. So I'm training to be a hypnotherapist, and I've learned with many different teachers. And I'm telling you with certainty that I believe hypnotherapy is vastly superior to psychotherapy. But in England, it's unregulated because they don't believe it's a real thing. It's unbelievable. 80% of the benefits of antidepressant is placebo effect. There's been some studies that show this, please believe me. And the thing is that it is true, believe and you will be healed. So how you see miraculous cure by Jesus and so on, well, people believe it so much that it happens. And the way it works is very simple, like a crash course in hypnotherapy. So on the conscious part, which is mostly where we think that we are, you have a judge. And what it does, it processes information, but it doesn't listen very much. And so it's kind of slow, but it's very, very smart. So that's the neocortex part of it. And then in the subconscious, there is what we call the daemon, or it's kind of like a mammal, kind of a cat, but kind of a cheeky animal. And this one is kind of very curious, is very powerful, is very horny, hedonist, moody, but it's grudgy too. And it can be violent as well if you don't treat him well. So the way it works, basically, is that you, during hypnotherapy session, you make a pact from the judge who's going to say, oh, I'm going to go on the side for now, and then you speak to the demon, or the subconscious, you could say. And the subconscious is a great listener. It believes everything. It's like children. So there's a correlation with like beta, alpha, theta state. So theta state is the state that we are in before the age of 3. So before we're 3-year-old, we're in constant theta, is the frequency of our minds. And we're sort of a slower frequency, and in this mode we write information. We just receive and we believe everything. Before the age of 3, before we develop our conscious part, the critical part, everything that occurs, we absorb it and we make it part of our reality. Then we go to alpha, so sort of from 3 to 7-year-old, where we are extremely creative and imaginative. And so hypnosis gets you back into this writing mode. So we relax the body, we relax the mind, and eventually we can talk to the subconscious. And suddenly we can change the beliefs. So instead of having the belief that, oh, life sucks and everybody's out there to get me, because it's been written by one specific traumatic event, you just rewrite it. You just say, okay, no, actually it's not so bad, you see? And because we keep this in memory, but those memories no longer serve us in our lives. And in one session, I've seen incredible transformations. And it's unbelievable that it's not out there in the mainstream, but I'm telling you, like, I see guys 2 years haven't had a girlfriend, and then in 2 weeks have a girlfriend, and then cannot stop. And same, another guy like last week as well, unbelievable. And or like stop addiction from the next day. I mean, hypnotherapy is amazing at this. Or I don't know, it's just unbelievable what you can do with it. And it seems it's not so recognized. And that's my intuition as a bonus, but I believe, the gamma is like when you have a peak of, aha. When you store a new insight, you go into gamma. And this is where I will call the genie. So you don't get to meet the genie very often, but if you learn to be in the flow and so on, you get to meet the genie once in a while. So I've learned a secret from, Marisa Peer, she's like the hypnotherapist of all the Silicon Valley CEO and many athletes and so on. So she's like the elite of hypnotherapists. And her secret is this. You put the belief of self-love inside. Many people lack of love from parenthood, from so on. Maybe they didn't have the parents that they wanted. They don't feel worthy. You sort of replace this belief with metaphor. So the language of the subconscious is the metaphor. You create new metaphor that people can relate to. So if it's Christian, it might be angels and so on. If it's Hindu, it's this goddess. So whatever, they can make sense of it. And through storytelling and a clever use of metaphors, you just rewrite this belief. Because it's like, imagine it's like a child who believes in those stories and appropriate themselves. And you inject the belief that, okay, you are loved, you are worthy, and so on, and people are transformed. Biofeedback, it works, but not everything is created equal. From my research, this is one of the best, Neurooptimal. I've tried for myself, and it's really good for anxiety treatment and ADHD and so on. I recommend you have a look. Cold therapy. So this guy is a crazy guy. He mounted the Everest in his shorts. And he's breaking the boundaries of what the human body can do. And he treats his own, let's say, family trauma, because his wife killed herself, and he was alone raising 4 children, and he had a really tough life. And he found through cold therapy, it released stress, it improved metabolism, and reduced inflammation. It restarts the nervous system. That's why they did the ice bucket challenge, to really, wake you up. And how they did like the baptism, in Christian, like how you make, because it really literally heals you. Binaural beats, they're quite subtle, but they do work. There is some evidence to show that it can stimulate, certain hormonal release. But you will have to do it consistently. And then positive affirmation, they do work. In fact, you get affirmation every day. All the commercials, corporations pay tons of money to get into your mind. So they create an addiction for you they create need for you to buy those things. That's what they're designed for. So they actually work because they create needs for you. And in fact, I would suggest that we should do the opposite. We should have positive affirmation in the public space, not just things that work against us. In fact, so one of the use of propaganda, in fact, in this very country, was the famous Keep Calm and Carry On. And in '39, they printed 2.5 million copies. They put it everywhere for 4 weeks. And it takes about 21 days, for like CBD, for it to leave an imprint in your mind. And eventually, your mind will rationalize this because your unconscious records everything, and your subconscious, will try to make sense of this thing all the time. And I'm telling you, it has been, it's still in the culture of Britain today. This Keep Calm and Carry On, but you embody it, and that's how you can actually create a belief system at mass scale, like this. They done it successfully, and so I've started to put, you can do it, be a man, help women, you are enough, and I think if we were to do just not trying to sell anything, just make people feel better, and by sheer repetition, it can improve people, like outlook on life. It will. But those are like sort of a treatment of causes. Now, I think to be sustainable, we need to work on prevention. And meditation, unless you've been living under a bridge, all its benefit that it gives. And but the thing that you really need to practice if you want to take it to the next level is forgiveness. So there's been many studies that show that the one single intervention you can do to improve your mental health is forgive others, like all your enemies, and then you can forgive yourself. In Zen, they say you should not be discriminative of like others are better than me, or vice versa. You should be indiscriminate. When you forgive others, you also give yourself permission to forgive yourself. You need to acknowledge your mistakes, because we lie to cover up for our mistakes. You should learn to apologize, be humble, which means knowing that you don't know everything, and also being able to apologize. Cultivate compassion, and radiate love and respect. And in return, you get love and respect. That's one of the things that I inject into the subconscious minds of my patients. I said, so men who wants to, to find a partner, I say, you radiate love and respect, and in return, you get love and respect. And so it's sort of an equal exchange, and you look for the interest of the other person. And eventually, it just happens. They don't need to do anything. And finally, one of the most important things is you need to accept things just the way they are. Like, if you're angry, that's fine. If you're sad, that's fine. Everything is meant to be just the way that it is. And is this I that's judging all the time, that's just the problem, You should just accept things. So honesty as well. So I started honesty meetups a year ago. And the idea is like, first we create trust, so we hug each other and do various things. And then we open up, but no one can judge what anyone says. And we open up about sex, about love, about work. Do you like your colleague? Do you like your parents? Do you have anything? And let me tell you, people just like, it's transformative for them. And some people said, yeah, he worked better than 8 years of psychotherapy, or it was like mind-opening revelation, and people feel relief. Truth will set you free. Like we keep holding on because we fear that we'll be judged for not being inadequate. The opposite is true. When you share, your insecurities or whatever, people will connect to you on a deeper level because they feel you're genuine. So we all wear masks and then we pretend, to be friends. But really, if you really want to make deep, meaningful connection, you have to remove the mask and show who you really are. Hugs. So hugs are actually one of the best therapy for curing loneliness. And we're such tactile animals, and babies need so much touch. And it's just that in our society we're so like, we have to be proper and so on. But Virginia Satir, which was one prominent family therapist, suggested that just you need 4 hugs a day just to survive. 8 hugs a day to feel, stand, and to thrive, you need 12 hugs a day. How many hugs did you get today? And finally, we just need to cultivate love, and love under all its different aspects, because love and acceptance is really the transformative force behind all of it. And it starts with self-love. In UK, we often have a culture of self-abuse, like, oh no, I'm not good, I'm not. Fuck that, you're fine just the way you are. You know you're good. You know you don't need to try anything or not to try. So cultivate compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, support, and cooperation. Really, love is a cooperation between people. Like a couple, it's just a cooperation. You're gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. So that's why I'm saying we don't need feminists, because you take a side. We need harmonists. We need people who work on both sides, because it's a relationship. And that's what we need to work on our relationship with each other. Because if we had all this figured out, we wouldn't need to treat ourselves. We will just be fine. And so that's it for me. Thank you so much for your time.